Hi everybody, welcome back to my YouTube page. My name is Eric, and today we're going to be going over a topic that I have been waiting to get into for a very long time, and that is the Red Pill movement. Recently, there has been some drama between specifically the Daily Wire crew and the Red Pill community. Now honestly, I would have liked to have covered this topic much sooner in my channel, but I felt as though my research wasn't quite adequate to give this topic the justice it deserves. And honestly, I'm glad that I did, because quite frankly, the Daily Wire has had time to refine its message towards the Red Pill community, and quite frankly, they haven't. And they weren't very good to begin with, and sadly that has not changed in more than a year. Now, full disclosure, I just want to say that to anybody who doesn't want to get married, that's fine. You don't have to get married. Although I am a Christian, and somebody who very strongly wants to be married one day, and is coming up with various strategies to protect myself as well as my future wife from the unfortunate circumstances of divorce, the truth of the matter is that the Daily Wire, in their response to this community, really has not been good. They've twisted their ankle trying to stick the landing and busted their face on the concrete. Now, I struggled to come up with how to summarize this video, because the truth of the matter is, I do think that the Daily Wire, while they do have a good idea in trying to encourage people to still get married, the execution of that idea is absolutely horrible. So, first, I am going to try and tell you why not only is this advice not adequate to protect people from the concerns that many of the Red Pill community has, but also why it won't resonate. And you can't expect Red Pill people to take you seriously if you continue down this type of reasoning. I'm not saying everything that the Daily Wire says is wrong, it just isn't complete. Not by a long shot. And that's what I'm going to be demonstrating throughout this entire video. First on the chopping block is Matt Walsh. I'm going to go over each Daily Wire host's arguments individually, briefly, and then we'll go from there. And then afterwards, I'll give my response to the Red Pill community to address a lot of their concerns, and to also help talking about the divorce laws in this country that do need a lot of reform, as well as the family courts. So, let's get started.
The claim that I so often hear is that, well, marriage and family life is a trap. It's a scam, especially for men. The whole thing is rigged against us. There is nothing for a man to do but give up on the entire enterprise and go his own way. This argument was summarized in a comment from a listener named Joshua, which I'll read. He says, "Still sounds like Matt and most tradcons' definition of what masculinity means is exclusively through the lens of women and children's wants and needs. Unfortunately, that ideal will no longer work in the modern world with birth control, hookup culture, social media, and court systems that favor women and the denigration of traditional masculinity."
Now keep in mind, Matt Walsh will basically grant most of the Red Pill talking points about how divorce courts highly favor women, men are much less likely to get custody of their children than women. They will also, again, men are primarily forced to pay different alimony payments, different supports, which can be incredibly financially burdening, and many other things like that. And also the fact that this can be done whether the woman is good or the woman is bad, He'll grant all of that. He'll grant a lot of it. But he differs on the solution. So, what is his answer? What is his response to their concerns? Well, let's see.
So, what is the problem with this view? Well, to begin with, it's nothing less than a full, unconditional surrender to the culture. It's true that the culture has increasingly made it difficult for both men and women to form and maintain strong, intact, lasting families. And that's because the elites who run our society don't want you to live that kind of life. They prefer that you focus on your individual wants, on fulfilling your own needs and satisfying your own desires. That's what they prefer for you. That's the life they want for you. A self-focused life is precisely the sort of life they wish for you.
Now, Matt, while he will grant that it is only the majority of men who will find their fulfillment in family life, again, the fact that he seems to imply that a single life, the majority of the time, is an inherently self-focused and selfish one is ridiculous. First of all, again, it's not as though single people all just spend all day focusing on themselves and nobody else. Like, first of all, I mean, again, I know that not every red pill person believes in God, but let's say single people, again, in church, they serve their church, or they do something else, or they still work their job. In some way, they still contribute to others. I mean, it's not as though, yes, they don't have the additional responsibility of, say, caring for a partner or children, but acting as though, it's inherently self-focused, that it's either you focus on family or you focus on yourself, when there's countless other things you can focus on. And again, both in your married and single life is kind of wrong. Even if you want to say that family life is the best joy, which again, I think Matt, to be charitable to him, I think is trying to say, but acting as though somebody who is doing this, who doesn't want to risk this because, they don't think it's a very good idea to sign a contract that they feel is lopsided, that, that's self-focused. No. That's pretty ridiculous.
Makes you easier to manipulate.
No. Sorry, but being married doesn't make you, it doesn't make you less likely to be manipulated. In fact, if anything, if you tell a married person, hey, this is gonna hurt your children, a lot of the time they won't investigate it. You can be tricked and scammed into saying, well, look, if you don't do this, your family could be hurt by X, Y, and Z. Your children could be hurt by X, Y, and Z. Many times, that is very easy. So saying that single people are more likely to be manipulated is, well, let's just say I'm going to need a citation for that, Matt.
Less of a threat to their agenda. Not really a threat at all. I mean, if you're just out there focused on yourself, being a consumer, buying lots of things for yourself, consuming things for yourself, and all the rest of it, you're not a threat to their agenda at all. I mean, you're going along with it.
Matt, last I checked, voting doesn't go away because you're single. I mean, again, you can still vote regardless of whether you're married or not. I mean, so acting as though, you can't be a threat to them, and the red pill community is highly diverse, and it's hard to even generalize them at all. And I'm not saying that, again, there aren't people like that in the red pill community, but it's not applicable to a lot of them. Now, there are many other things that red pill, that people can do if they're single, that are not just gratifying me immediately.
The way the family court systems are set up, birth control, all the rest of it. It's an attack on the family. So what is the answer? To give up? To give the conspirators exactly what they want? To reward them for their efforts by turning your back on the very thing they've been assaulting for decades? The family is the fortress that they have been attacking.
Let's say that somebody poisons your water supply. Let's just hypothetically say that. Now, water is even more essential than marriage. I mean, you literally can't survive without water, at least not for long. Now, obviously, the person who did that means to do you harm. Are you going along with their plan because, well, they didn't want you to be able to have clean water, so you're going along with their plan to be able to, because you're not going to drink out of the poison water supply? Well, no, of course not. I hope you wouldn't drink out of a poisonous water supply. So this idea that, oh, well, you're going along with the plan. Well, first of all, number one, you can devote more of your time and energy to various causes to try and change things if you're single. In many ways. Now, obviously, by raising strong families, yes, that can be a tremendous help to society as well. But acting as though you're going along with their plan, that single people are inherently not a threat to whatever you think their agenda is ridiculous.
But if you choose to surrender, then at least be honest about what you're doing. It is a submission. It is certainly not the strong or masculine response to run away and abandon your post.
Matt, I'm going to say this loud and clear for you. You don't have a post. Nobody has a post until they actually get married. Now, yeah, obviously, if you're married, you shouldn't abandon your kids or your wife or your husband if you're a woman. But trying to say, like, oh, well, you're abandoning your post. There is no obligation to get married. And we'll get into more on demonstrating that in a moment, but let's let Matt Walsh continue.
To stop fighting because the fight is too difficult. I mean, that approach is many things, but it certainly isn't manly.
Yes, shaming. Great tactic. Anyway, it is funny, though, that in this very same video, he actually, his sponsor, one of his sponsors at least, for the video, is this whole Bible in a Year podcast.
If you're someone who has always wanted to read and understand the Bible, but you're not sure where to start, then check out the Bible in a Year podcast from Ascension. Bible in a Year.
And yet, his views are not in line with the Bible. So, either he didn't take advantage of his app, or he didn't pay much attention. So, again, let's see what the actual Bible says. Let's take a look at Matthew 19, verse 9, starting in verse 9. And this is Jesus speaking. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another, commits adultery. The disciples said to him, if such is the case of a man with his wife, it is better not to marry. But he said to them, not everyone can receive this saying, but only to those whom it is given. Now, again, did he say, well, how dare you, you're abandoning your post? Well, no. I mean, he just said, yeah, not everybody can accept this saying. But let's take this a bit further in 1 Corinthians 7. 1 Corinthians 7, verse 1 through 6. Now concerning the matters about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman, but because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband, for the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by mutual agreement, for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Now, as a concession not a command, I say this. And going on to verse 7, I wish that all were as I myself am, i.e., single and able to be just celibate. But each has his own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. Now, let's catch this for a second. He says, and he's speaking specifically to people who are being tempted with sexual immorality. And yet, what does he say in verse 6? He says, I'm recommending this. I'm saying this as a concession. Other translations saying, I'm saying this as a suggestion or a concession. But either way, the translation is still the same. I'm saying this not as a command. I'm not commanding you to get married. If he's not saying you have to do this, then why would he say that with somebody else who maybe is just, hurt or doesn't want to take any more risks? So this idea that, you're abandoning your post, or this other crap, it's not how it works. It's not in the Bible, which Matt claims to believe and want to understand.
You're also giving up on yourself, on your own legacy, your own bloodline, and what is your consolation prize? Finding financial success? I mean, the unfortunate irony is that many of the men who give up on these things in favor of, I'll just focus on myself and try to be financially successful, many of them are never even going to be financially successful. So they end up with just nothing. They end up broke and alone with nothing. So is the answer then to forego all joy? To say forget about joy because it might not work out? To embrace a life of loneliness and misery because you're worried that if you aim higher, you'll end up lonely and miserable?
No, Matt. Again, there are countless ways you can invest your time in, being a person who, yes, is financially successful. I mean, first of all, leaving aside the fact that in order to be financially successful in any capacity, or heck, even just being able to support yourself, you have to in some way serve others or offer them a product or service. I mean, you just have to. I mean, even if you're an influencer, at the end of the day, you are providing information, service, content, heck, even entertainment to others. And they are paying you to do it. So acting as though, I'm going to be, you're guaranteed to be just alone, or you're guaranteed to be self-focused. I mean, no, you literally can't survive in this world very long without doing some kind of service for somebody else. But again, he also, and again, for people who may think that I'm making too much of his remarks, he has made the same remarks, only more explicitly, in his second video, which was just a few months ago now, saying, you're guaranteed to be miserable. If you're single, but you originally may have wanted to get married, and that isn't true. And to further clarify that this is what Matt Walsh meant, that you're guaranteed to have, to be unhappy if you are a person, even if you get financial success, because yes, he does concede that yes, some people will be financially successful. I don't know what exactly he considers to be financially successful, but that's another discussion. Either way, Matt Walsh, in one of his more recent responses to the Red Pill community, had this to say.
Sure, you can stave off that sort of catastrophe by staying by yourself, never going out on a limb, never taking any risk, never marrying, never having kids, never striving for anything great or meaningful in life. But then you're not avoiding failure and misery, you are guaranteeing it. Not losing by having nothing to lose is a loss in itself. And I don't want that for anyone. It's not a path to happiness and prosperity for either you or society. It is a path to defeat, a preemptive and self-imposed defeat. But this is not a viable solution. It's not a solution at all. It's a surrender. You're asking entire generations to give up their bloodline, their legacy, their chance of finding the transcendent joy and meaning that family life can provide. Now, I don't deny that there are real serious problems with marriage in our society. The so-called red pill people and others, they raise totally legitimate and important points on that end. We need drastic reform, abolish no-fault divorce. The entire family court system has to be torn down and rebuilt. The system is stacked against men in many ways that are extremely unfair and have ruined countless lives. So let's fight for those reforms, absolutely. But this systemic problem is not going to be solved today or tomorrow or next week. Abolishing no-fault divorce is just the beginning of reforming the system. Lawmakers in a small number of red states have only just started to seriously consider that idea, which is merely step one. So we're a long way off from fixing the system. It took decades to get us here. It will take decades to get us out at best.
Well, first of all, Matt, this isn't going to be, we don't have to just completely overturn no-fault divorce. There are many different laws in between. For example, Florida recently ended permanent alimony payments. And there's no, again, divorce law does to an extent vary from state to state, but there can be many different ways to try and take care of the primary concerns that men have. For example, just having the idea that, that certain property rights, who gets what, or different other laws like that. Reforms to those type of laws about who gets what after divorce, or many different things. So you don't have to just completely overturn no-fault divorce. I'm not saying they're overnight processes, but again, abolishing, making alimony reforms. And many other things with regards to equal shared custody and child support. Many different things like that. Again, I'm not saying those things are cakewalks, but again, abolishing no-fault divorce, that's a big project.
Think about the catastrophic, probably fatal effect this would have on our country. You can't give up on propagating the species for a few decades and then pick it back up again like nothing happened.
I'll just set your concerns at ease. We're not going to convince 150 million people not to get married. Saying, an entire generation, no. That's never going to happen. Human beings are not biologically programmed to do that. You can convince a portion. Sure, you can. But there's not going to be just an entire generation of people. Certainly not in America with hundreds of millions of people. But you don't have to convince hundreds of millions of people to forego marriage or forego relationships. All you have to do is basically get politicians to be worried about future birth rates. You don't need a huge amount, millions upon millions of people. This quote-unquote catastrophic effect that you think it's going to have, again, I'm not denying that birth rates are important, but it's not going to just completely fatally ruin the entire country. It's doubtful, anyway.
Am I saying that young men and women should accept the risk then and get married anyway? Yes.
Matt, how exactly is that supposed to work? I mean, in fact, Matt Walsh has practically spearheaded both the Target boycott that the right did and the Bud Light campaign for having Dylan Mulvaney on the on their thing. Would either of those things have worked if you had just said, well, Bud Light did something horrible, but I'm still gonna keep drinking Bud Light? Well, no, it wouldn't have worked. They would have been said. They would have just said, okay, noted, great. We're still going to keep doing what we did before. It's hard enough to get people to pay attention to men's issues simply because of a combination of factors, one being that it takes men so long to actually bring up an issue because we've practically been conditioned to not whine or not say anything or just constantly keep things inside. Another factor is just the fact that because of different radical indoctrination about how, men have been oppressors and everything else, you're already fighting an uphill battle if you're trying to do anything on behalf of men, at least in the internet sphere. And now that these states are finally trying to change some of these laws, now they're just supposed to go back? Well, it's difficult enough to get there to where they finally can get a hearing. And now what? They're just supposed to go back and say, well, yeah, okay, it's risky, I disagree with it, but I'm still going to support it. Well, then that's just going to make the politicians take more time. It's a sad thing, but politics, basically the loudest people tend to get politicians' attention. And again, if politicians would be smart, and these people say, look, I'll vote for you if you change this, if you start to change this, if you start to do that, that will provide more incentives to do it. Either way, if they're committed to this and they are not ready for any kind of relationship, and that's what they want to do, then yeah, frankly, they should protest. Because people are going to take them more seriously.
It's also true that there are many, many things you can do in your marriage and before your marriage to make it much more secure than the average. Obvious things. Like you can marry someone who shares your same fundamental values. You can do other things. Like you can state from the outset that you both in principle don't believe in divorce and won't consider it as a viable option for solving any marital difficulties you may experience down the line. You can have a strong and shared faith. You can establish from the beginning a habit of honest communication. You can make time for each other. You can continue to date, even or especially as your lives get busier and you start having kids and so on. You can make a strong effort to be patient with and grateful to each other. You can take care of your body and your appearance. You can do all these things and more.
All of those things are completely valid. Sadly, although I would recommend that all people do those things that Matt has suggested, I will say that there are many people throughout the red pill community. Now, I'm not going to say this is the majority, but it's many people. It's not a tiny minority phenomenon who had this happen to them. They did all those things, and they still got divorced. Now, Matt admits that that can happen, but he basically tries to argue, oh, well, it's really, really small. It's rare that that all happens. And Matt didn't provide any real stats on that. Now, again, just for clarity, he does argue against the 50% statistic, and he's correct that a lot of the time it doesn't take into factors, the factors that he pointed out. But how much would it decrease by? I mean, he just gave a vague generalization, which isn't really any hard data. Is it down to 25%, 10%, 2%, 30%? Again, he doesn't really argue or present evidence for how much it decreases. Now, I agree that chances will decrease of that happening. But it's not just this tiny, very rare phenomenon, at least not when you talk to the red pill crowd. And you gotta provide much more hard data than just that. So, what are some of the ways that you can still get divorced if you have, if you've done all those things? Many times people get married and, their values change, and not always for the better. There can be countless different situations where, somebody turns into one political party and the other one turns to another. Again, there can be, some people can sadly lose their faith during the middle of marriage because of crises that happen. And there's also a lot of other things, for example, that can determine it. One thing is that many people who say they're not going to get divorced, marriage turns out to be a lot harder than they thought it was. They think they can do it, but it turns out that it's harder, and they eventually just succumb. And there's also, if you had asked King David, hey, David, listen, if you were ever king, would you just impregnate one of your soldiers' wives and then kill him to cover it up? He probably would have said, no way, I'd never do that. In fact, in the New Testament, we have Peter saying, I'm never going to deny you. And literally, less than a day later, the next morning, he did it 3 times. So, point is that, again, there are other things we can do to mitigate those, but those answers by themselves don't really address a lot of the red pills community's concerns. Sadly, Matt has not changed his tune, because even as late as this past Valentine's Day, in a backroom, backstage discussion with the rest of the Daily Wire crew, he claims that the red-pilled people never answered his questions.
I've always, with the red pill, and I've been in many altercations with the red. I've run afoul of the red pill crowd many times talking about these issues. And the question I've always had for them that they've never answered, and I'd love to hear an answer from any of them, is that, because I agree with 95% of their criticisms, as you point out, the family courts and it's how it's stacked against men and so on and so forth. What's the other option?
And yet, he doesn't seem to be aware of a lot of comments that people have made on his videos. Now, I understand that he has 3 million subscribers, and I don't expect him to read every comment, because that would be insane. But it makes me wonder how far he truly looked for an answer. Now again, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he genuinely hasn't heard an answer, but really, best case scenario, that just means he really hasn't looked very far. At least it doesn't seem like that to me. Now the next person we're going to go over is Jeremy Boring. And I'm not going to pull any punches. This guy has said some really, frankly, disgusting things that honestly are contemptible and really don't deserve any respect. He has said this in his tweets. Now, in response to Pearl Davis's question saying, the virtue signaling needs to stop. For an organization that talks about facts, let's ask the question, would you ever sign a contract that failed 75% of the time where your business partner is paid to break the contract? Jeremy's response is the following. Because men have an affirmative obligation to lead families. Because being fruitful and multiplying is a command that predates even sin entering the world. Because an unmarried male can never fully be a man. Because the answer to society's problems lies first in the reconstruction of the family. And this is the most contemptible thing, because the answer to fixing marriage lies in more fully formed men, not in more whiny, bitching man-children with the sads because life is unfair, living only for themselves and calling themselves alphas. Because I am not a child. Oh, there is so much wrong with this that I don't even know where to begin. And for the record, Matt Walsh also believes that you're not a real man, even until you have kids, not even just marriage. And it's in this clip.
You aren't going to be fully accepted as a grown man until you get married and have kids. That's just the way it is. I'm not saying it should be that way. Well, I mean, I am saying it should be that way. But that's not the main point. That is how people see it. And so if you want to graduate to the adult table, then you have to have kids of your own. You basically, look at it this way. You supply your own replacement for the kids' table. Once you have your own kid, they sit there, you get to graduate to the adult table.
In addition to this vomit-inducing tweet, He had this to say this past Valentine's Day.
Well, to have an atom, you have to have a proton and an electron, right? So it's like a man is a proton, like very important, but essentially nothing until it's unified.
To have Adam, you need to have an Eve.
Are you okay?
I'm fine. I just threw up in my mouth a little bit.
So let's debunk this tweet point by point. Number 1, men are obligated to lead families. Well, men can lead families, and if they are to have families, then yes, the Bible does appoint him as the head. But where does it say, well, you're a sinner if you don't have family? Like, where does it say that in the Bible? Since, you know, he constantly claims to be a Christian, where does it say that in the Bible? It doesn't. I mean, I've already proven that that's false with, again, 1 Corinthians 7. So, let's move on. Because being fruitful and multiply is a commandment that predates even sin entering the world. Yeah, it was also around the time that the planet was basically empty. And it's also, I mean, yes, it was repeated right after Noah and his family survived the flood, so they needed to repopulate the earth. But again, acting as though this is compulsory for all times, it's not the case. Because an unmarried man can never fully be a man.
But where's his evidence?
Where's the evidence for that? Prove it.
Evidence! Evidence! He wants evidence!
Again, it's just an assertion. It's a lie. In fact, ironically enough, even in the book of Genesis, God says it is not good for the man to be alone. Now, he still called him a man before he had Eve, his wife. It's an assertion. It's a BS shaming tactic that really has no place in intellectual discourse. The answer lies in the reconstruction of the family. Okay, fine. Although I'm pretty sure it doesn't lie in shaming and forcing people into a relationship that they don't want. Because if they don't want a relationship and they're basically pressured to be in one, you really want to consign another person to be with them when they don't really want to? You really want to have kids who, you know, who he was just shamed into having and doesn't really want? You think that's gonna produce good families?
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Dream on. Because the answer in fixing marriages lies in more fully formed men, not in more whiny, bitching man-children with the sads, because life is unfair living only for themselves and calling themselves alphas.
Oh yeah, nausea!
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
So what's wrong with this self-righteousness puke fest? Well, for one thing, Jesus and Paul changed the society they were in through their making of disciples. Jesus formed the teachings. Paul also spread the teachings far and wide. But single people were fairly instrumental in forming Christianity in and of itself. So this nonsensical BS idea that, the answer to fixing society is only in families. No. It can be, and don't get me wrong, if you form well-adjusted families, yes, that's obviously an ideal situation to raise kids in. But this nonsense idea that, that first of all, to say, they're whiny, bitching man-children. So basically the guys who got their kids taken away unjustly from a vindictive, horrible ex-wife, they're whining and bitching man-children. You're an idiot. Like, you are a contemptible, vile person. You don't know what you're talking about. And also, you know what this most likely is? It's basically the stupidity of thinking, well, Christ was confrontational, because so many Christians will say, well, Jesus stood up for righteousness, and he was bold, and spoke the truth, and told it like it is. Yeah, you want to know? And they say, well, I'm bold, and I'm speaking what I think is the truth, so I'm like Jesus. No, that's not how it works. You want to know the types of sins and types of people that Jesus was harsh and bold to? The proud, arrogant people. Not the people who were dejected, worn out, and badly injured, emotionally or physically. So yes, he was bold. But it would be more to people like you. Not these other people who have been hurt by the system. Well, he spoke out against religious leaders, basically using God's law in a draconian type of way. Like, for example, well, you can't heal somebody miraculously on the Sabbath because that's work. He also hated it when Pharisees constantly laid heavy burdens on people's backs, and yet they weren't willing to lift a finger to bear them. And again, Matt Walsh, Jeremy Boring are all highly wealthy, and wealthy people can recover much more easily than a divorce from either a middle-class person or even a lower-class person. This is a vile tweet, and this isn't something that Christ would in any way approve. He'd be screaming at you if he were here. He sets the standards, not you. So if you really call yourselves Christians, then I suggest you get in line and submit to that. So let me put this very, very politely. Now, next one is Michael Knowles. Now, I will give him credit that he is at least better in some ways than the other two, but honestly, not by much. He does mention prenups in his discussion with Brian of the Whatever podcast, but his information on prenups is not entirely accurate.
If you're going to do that anyway, but you want to protect against divorce, why not just marry a woman who's not going to get divorced?
Well, no kidding, but that's not a helpful answer. Nobody gets married and says, oh, so you gonna get divorced? She's like, yeah, okay, great, I'm still gonna marry you. That's not that simple. Michael saying that is like me going into the National Department of Treasury and saying, guys, I got this great idea on how we get rid of our national debt. We just pay it back. Now, they would look at me like I was stupid because they'd be like, well, no, duh, of course you would do that, but we have to figure out how to do that without bankrupting ourselves. It's not that simple. Okay? So, yes, obviously you want to select somebody who's not going to get divorced. It's not helpful.
What if before you get married, you sign a prenup? But not the kind of prenup now. Not the kind of prenup where you say, okay, in case we get divorced, we get 50-50. What if you sign a prenup that says, if you divorce me...
I will kill you.
Yeah, I'll kill you. Whoever brings the divorce forfeits everything. That's the Knowles prenup. And then you're safe. She's not going to take your kids, and she's not going to take your money. And you get to be married and not have a life partner.
Sure.
Now, I've checked multiple legal sources on this from a wide variety of people. And pretty much every single person advises that if you don't want your prenup to get thrown out, because prenups can sometimes be dismissed in court, in divorce court, and everything like that. And one of the biggest reasons why they do is if you just basically leave your spouse or your ex-spouse out to dry. Another thing is that prenups don't actually cover child custody or child support or various things like that. They can't.
I've done the math. 50% of marriages end in divorce, and the stats I've seen, 80% of divorces are initiated by women. But I mean, I think 97% of alimony payments go from men to women. So there are some concerns there financially, and then just you have the government involved, and then it can be quite contentious. And then not only is there the consideration in terms of splitting your assets, but then you have lawyers involved. And
it should also be noted that in prenups, spousal support, if the marriage ends, they're not able to be determined. There is going to be some level of spousal support. But again, how much can be determined and up for negotiation, but just saying, well, I'm just going to get no support from alimony payments, that prenup is not likely to withstand, and it's not likely to be upheld in court. Now, there are many other things that can get your prenup thrown out. If you want to know, again, obviously talk to a lawyer on how to positively construct a prenup, but also, and make sure that they're experienced in this specific way. You can find somebody online even if you want advice. There are many different ways to do that. But here's some things just that I'll give out that can invalidate a prenup if you do them. One thing is that you can't hide any assets. If it's found out that you had a secret bank account that you never told anybody about, then again your prenup can be thrown out or invalidated or in some way disclosed. The other thing is fair and equitable terms. Like I said before, prenups that just basically leave your spouse with nothing are likely to get thrown out. They can take things into infidelity into account. They can take things like that into account to divide and make one spouse get lesser assets because of some extenuating factor. But if you think that you're just going to throw off and just kick them to the curb and put them in a cardboard box, that's never going to happen. Another thing is that make sure you don't spring this on them a week or a day before the wedding. Give them time, because a lot of the time they'll say, oh, well, I just didn't want to cancel the wedding because I sent the wedding invitations out and now I'm going to have to confess this. It's no. Soon after the engagement would probably be ideal to do this. But also, make sure that you inform your spouse, or your future spouse in this case, make sure that you inform them, again, give them a chance to negotiate, read it, comprehend it, sign it in the presence of witnesses. Some states actually require that, but honestly, signing it in front of witnesses, even if it's not required by your state, is still beneficial. So have them sign it in front of witnesses, have them say, if you want to take this to a lawyer and obtain legal advice, that's fine. Let them do that. But in any case, let's move on to one more person at the Daily Wire, Andrew Klavan. Now, Andrew Klavan, unfortunately, doesn't have very much better advice. Basically, this is his tweet on the subject. At least this was a few months ago. He says, long before you or Tate or any of the red pills, I was an outspoken anti-feminist, but also an anti-misogynist. Femininity, with its work of soul-making and home-making, is a spiritual value, and both the right and left have become materialistic. So degrading the feminine sphere that now people can't even define the word woman and think a man in a dress will suffice. So of course, as Justpearlythings has noted, marriage is broken. But to deride the institution and denigrate women, these aren't ideas that can be debated. They're just inarticulate cries of pain from souls in a materialist hell. You can't treat bodies as sex toys and then complain when you wake up in bed with an abusive pimp or a crazy whore. Pimps and whores are vicious people. What did you expect? If we men of the Daily Wire are too complacent about marriage, I hope it's because we're religious men who understand the value of our wives and honor them accordingly. That makes it less likely you'll have to worry about the broken system of marriage. Mr. Klavan, men who treat women like pimps and basically sleep around a lot typically don't get married. There are countless men, in fact the majority of people I've interacted with who basically have been through divorce court have never just treated their wives like sex objects either before or during the marriage. So this idea that, oh, it's the norm that these guys just selected some random girl they hooked up with and thus, they should have expected them to just be, people who would do this is ridiculous, it's out of touch, and frankly, it is honestly just so demonstrative of the lack of research that Andrew Klavan has really done. Now, Andrew Klavan, of course, backstage had this to say this past Valentine's Day.
I say this all the time. It's like you have to begin with yourself. I mean, this thing that somehow the society is supposed to change for you to change is the exact opposite of manhood as far as I'm concerned. You start out, who am I? What do I want? What am I doing here? Where am I going?
Not always. Protests, usually, at least good ones, involve not cooperating with the system that they feel is unjust. Many times protests say, you know what, I'm not getting these products anymore. And if the culture is trying to sell them a marriage with a lopsided contract, why should they buy it? Now again, living with your convictions is fine, but Andrew's advice is just not very useful here. And good luck using that on any of the red-pilled community.
This is the moment when you have to say, I stand here. I stand in this place. I am this person. But if they're actually talking about the opposite of what those girls represent, then live that way and live it out loud.
Yeah.
If we don't live like that, if we don't live speaking out, if we're constantly dropping our voices when we say the truth, we're done for. We're done for.
You can't just, keep signing contracts if people keep breaking them. And, that's essentially just enabling other people to break other contracts. If you incentivize people not to change, again, through a lot of various laws, that's not going to work. So, those are my responses to the Daily Wire hosts, and I know that I've spent a lot of time calling them out and telling them what they shouldn't do. In addition to that, I would say that if you want to look at more information about how to not get your prenup thrown out, go and look into the description of video. I have more information on that, and you can just read that. But additionally, what are some other things you can do in order to give your marriage a better chance at being successful? Well, here are a few things. Number one, who does your partner go to whenever they are in trouble, need advice, need relationship advice, or anything else? Because if they constantly go to people who advise grudge holding, constantly advise horrible, toxic behaviors like the silent treatment, ghosting, and other nonsense like that, well, in that case, you should either A, tell them how you feel about any specific behaviors, and you can try to establish, hey, if we ever have problems in our relationship, maybe you can just establish a third party, like a counselor, a pastor, or something like that. Of course, if they have good friend groups already, then hey, all the better. You could at least have them make sure that there are different people that you both like and agree are good to go to if there is any marriage conflict. And, make sure that they are willing to follow up on that. But basically, if they are constantly ingesting stuff that encourages unforgiveness, rigidity, or different things like that, then again, you should either take steps to correct that or choose somebody else. You can also look for, as well as develop in yourself, qualities of resiliency. Being resilient can allow you to not strike back at somebody and not be easily offended in the first place. Also, to be resilient enough so that you keep going, but also make sure that they don't have to be like this person who just takes everything and keeps it in. Somebody who is disciplined and able to say, hey, can you please stop that? I don't like when you do that. They're courageous enough to speak up, but disciplined and loving enough to not bite your head off and not leave you over, mistakes like that. So that's another thing you can look for. If somebody is resilient and forgiving, those are big green flags. So make sure to develop those skills and make sure that other people are working on them too. Or, at the very least, you can have them agree to, certain goals that, yes, this thing is a good thing to strive for. They don't always have to succeed in everything, but at the very least, establish a goal and have values so that it is at the very least something to strive for, even if you don't live up to the values perfectly. There is also other things that you can try and look for and develop in yourself, such as the ability to listen and not just feel the urge to strike back whenever somebody is bringing a concern to you. Like, maybe they're just ranting, have a bad day, don't phrase something the exact right way, and, it may not be fully fair what they say, but make sure that you are resilient enough that you can still endure that, but at least make it so that when they finally calm down, you can have a conversation about it. You can address the problem that's causing this, but at least let them get a lot of their emotions out, or at the very least, not to take things so personally if that happens. Of course, you also can get out of the habit of saying, you never do this, you never say this, you never do this, you always do that. Basically exaggerations and everything else. Because again, those things are not helpful to say when 99% of the time they're not even true. You can say that they don't do it as often as you like, but do not say, well, you never do this, unless you're dang sure that it's actually true. I would always recommend, and same with just about everybody, that at least a year has to go by before you seriously consider marriage, because again, a few months of time generally isn't good enough. Some cases it can be longer than a year, but I personally wouldn't recommend even proposing or considering marriage until maybe a year after you've started dating them. So that's my view. Another thing is that you can get involved with a group who is trying to change the laws, and the way that you can bring in your passion about certain subjects in which you feel that men are disadvantaged, be able to talk about that. And you don't have to say it like, this is relevant to me because I'm afraid of this in a relationship. You can just say, oh, I was at my group today. If, you're having a conversation with them, they ask, hey, what did you do today? And you can say, I did this, blah, blah, blah. And you can tell them about the program you're involved in. And many times they can even ask a conversation and start up a conversation. And you can say, yeah, I'm passionate about changing certain laws that disadvantage people because I don't want anybody to be hurt. That way you're not saying, well, I'm afraid of this happening to me, and thus by proxy I have to protect myself against you. And that way it can just be a topic of conversation that they can be aware of. Don't even search for opportunities to inject it, just let it flow naturally. And that way, she can, maybe, they can even be educated on that. Many people are just not educated on this. And maybe they might even support your passion, and it will be much easier rather than just, everything's good throughout our entire years of dating, and oh, by the way, I also believe this, so just springing on all of the concerns that you have. So definitely, it's a lot more organic to just make it happen over time. So this was a bit of a long video, but thank you so much if you watched till the end. Give this video a like and thumbs up, and again, just to restate my conclusion, I believe marriage is worth it, and there are many things you can do to mitigate your risks, both legally and socially. But I would recommend that, again, you continue to check out the sources I gave below, and hopefully, heck, you could even send this to the Daily Wire crew, because they have much more influence than I do, and maybe, this will get them to change their posture on a lot of things that, frankly, they should. But thanks again, guys, and I love you all. Bye-bye.